we've always had contracting in and contracting out Tupe provisions, but we've never had specific provisions before. When they brought in the 2006 regulations, they brought in specific provisions under the banner of a service provision change. Okay? The first thing that I always do, however, with Tupe is always remind everybody what it's there for. Because there are lots of grey areas and there are lots of borderline cases with Tupe issues. And you always have to say, well, in trying to figuring out what we should do, what's it there for? What's its purpose? Why do we have Tupe regulations? This is kind of the underlying ethos of Tupe, and it's to safeguard employees' rights in the event of transfers of undertakings, businesses, or parts of undertakings. There's no mention in there of the employer whatsoever. Okay? Which is worth bearing in mind. In other words, these are designed to look after employees' interests primarily, not to do the employers any particular favours. So in other words, if you've got a 50-50 borderline case and you're in front of a tribunal chairman going, you should look out for the employer, chances are he's going to look out for the employee, I'm afraid. Yeah? And that's just the way these regulations are designed. So what we're going to look at is a service provision change. It's contracting in and contracting out by another name. Okay? The requirements are quite simple. You have to have an organised grouping of employees within the current provider, whether that be a council or whether that be the current outsourced provider. Yeah? So prior to the transfer, you say, have I got an organised grouping of employees situated in Great Britain? There are rules for Northern Ireland as well, but they're under separate regulations, but they do pretty much the same thing, which is why it says Great Britain, not United Kingdom. But the key point is you have this organised grouping with its principal purpose as the carrying out of an activity for the client. To give you an example, security services is a very common area. You outsource your security to a security guarding company, they provide those security services to you as the client. Yep. Depending on how they deliver those services, there may or may not be an organised grouping of employees with the principal purpose of delivering those activities to you. Yep. So if what happens is they send you a security guard who stands in reception, it's the same bloke every day, year on year, and it's one person, he can still be an organised grouping of employees. Yeah? One person can be it, 100 people can be it. If actually they send you whichever security guard they happen to have available that day from time to time, chances are that there isn't an organised grouping of employees, and therefore there wouldn't then be a Tupe transfer if you change provider. So it can be driven by the way in which the services are provided pre-transfer. Okay? So if you have a contract with, say, DHL for logistics services, and what actually happens is what you really mean is couriering. Whenever you ring up, they send whichever courier they've got, you're unlikely to fall within this. If actually they provide you with a logistics team that is the same set of people, you're likely to fall within these sorts of provisions. Does everybody sort of understand that sort of key differential? You're looking at how it's structured, how it's delivered pre-transfer. You're not necessarily focused on what's going to happen with it after transfer to the same degree. Okay? You then have three common scenarios of a service provision change, and they are quite simply that you start off with an activity, be it security, be it HR, be it legal services, be it whatever, yeah, that's in this scenario provided by the client to themselves, and they outsource it to a provider who provides it to the client. So you take HR, you outsource it to an HR provider, and they provide those services for you. Okay? Insofar as you had an organised grouping, whose principal activity was doing those services, at this point you will have a Tupe transfer to the new provider. Okay? So that's simple outsourcing. Very common, particularly in local authorities. You take a service you do yourself, and you get someone in the private sector to do it on your behalf. Okay? You then got bog standard insourcing, which is where you decide 2 or 3 years later that the person you outsourced it to is rubbish, or it's costing too much, or isn't doing the job, so you decide to do it yourself again. Yeah? We outsourced IT support, but it's been a complete disaster, so actually we'd rather just do it ourselves. So what happens is you say to that provider, do you have an organised grouping of resources who provide us with IT? Oh yeah, we do, these people. Oh great, we end up with them back. Yeah? I've had cases where the people who we outsourced 3 years ago, we've ended up getting back 3 years later, which is brilliant. Yeah? Because the reason we got rid of them in the first place is they were rubbish, and we've just re-inherited them, and they're still rubbish. Fantastic. So that's not exactly a great cure for poor performance, unfortunately, because the same rubbish employees just bounce around a lot. But that's the second common scenario. The third scenario is the other most common one, which is where the activity is provided by a current outsourced provider. Whether or not it was ever provided in-house in the first place is irrelevant. It's provided to you for your benefit by an outsourced provider, and you change outsourced providers. So I go from security company A to security company B. Okay? Insofar as security company A has that organised grouping structure with their principal purpose, there will be a transfer of the people who are assigned to that organised grouping of employees.